So how do you introduce Mimi Feigelson? I'll tell you how I'll introduce Mimi Feigelson. When I first studied with my teacher, David Hartman, he told us a great story. When he was a kid in yeshiva, they came around to yeshiva, all the desks in yeshiva, and they said, David, we're collecting a few dollars because we're going to have a celebration. It's the 750th yard site of the Rambam. It's the 750th anniversary of the death of the Rambam. And Hartman said, he looked up from his books and he said, he's dead? When did he die? How could he be dead? We were learning together this morning. We were learning together this morning. We were in an argument this morning. When did he die? And that's the attitude of somebody who really learns. Now, I want to show you something, which is, you left it here, so as long as this exactly right. This is a Hasidic commentary on the Torah by the Ishbitzer Rav, an 18th century Hasidic rabbinic genius. This is a marvelous book. And the wonderful thing about Reb Mimi is, even though he lived in the 18th century, she spends a couple hours with him every day. They're very intimate, I have to tell you, right? And you can see from the book that what she's done here is she's like, all this other stuff is stuck in here. Because when you find a teacher this good, he becomes your touch point for everything that you find in Torah. And you argue with him, you disagree with him, you embrace him and you love him. You see the world through his eyes. And for Reb Mimi, these great rabbis from the 18th century, the 17th century, the 18th century, and the 19th century, these great rabbis are still alive because their vision is so deep, their truth is so profound, and their spirit is so hot, you can't let go of it. And the joy of learning with Reb Mimi is that this is what she shares with us. She makes it accessible to all of us who have to try to figure out what these guys are trying to say. Reb Mimi is the Mashpiach Ruchani at the AJU Rabbinical School. Translation, she is the chief spiritual counselor for a new generation of young American rabbis. Under her tutelage, under her supervision, more than 200 rabbis have entered the community, and they have the same vision, this wonderful depth of vision and understanding. She has we have to wish her a mazel tov too, because she's been struggling to finish a PhD for about 25 years, right? And this morning at 4 a.m., she finished. She turned it in. That is such a marvelous thing. But you know, the truth of the matter is, I'm going to make you feel lousy for a moment, which is, we would have loved you anyway. Because PhD or no PhD, it's the depth of your vision and soul which our community cherishes. So now that you have a PhD, hoo-ha, your mama's going to be very proud, right? And your teachers would be very proud. But the truth of the matter is, it's the depth of your vision and spirit that makes you Reb Mimi, the rabbi to all of us. It is a real privilege to have my friend here in Shul. So, please welcome her. These are my best students. So take good care of them, okay? Take till 9 or take till 8, and then we'll have coffee, and then we'll come back and we'll schmooze a little.
Great, okay, okay. I shared with Rabbi Feinstein a moment ago that it is true. I have slept about until 4 a.m. this morning.
I'm going to do it. This microphone's really strange, very temperamental, so you have to speak right into the mic and shout. Not shout, you just have to speak directly into the mic. Make it your
I
friend.
can be intimate with a mic.
There you go.
I wanted to say, we have to spell it differently. Who reads my mind here? I was saying to Rabbi Feinstein a moment ago that it is true that between Shabbat morning and 4 a.m. this morning, I put in 14 hours of sleep. And knowing that I actually needed to sleep today a bit so I could be here tonight was a gift, and being able to share Torah is a gift, because the truth is, in many ways, the question always is, what do you do when you walk away from? What do we do the first moments after Yom Kippur? What do we do those first moments after Shabbat? How do we walk away from? And walking away from this morning, a labor of love, of, truth be told, 3 decades, knowing that I was walking away to here was an amazing gift. And so many times people walk away and they don't know where they're walking away to. And knowing that there was this community waiting for me and there was Torah to share tonight, it gave me a way of really walking away with great joy. And I know that my life shifted. And I grew up in Israel, and there's an expression in Israel which, thank God in this room, when I explain it, I don't really need to explain it, because to generations now, it means nothing. There's an expression in the army, which is lahafoch taklit, which means that you turn the record over. And at this point, when you say turn the record over, you guys are nodding, and most people now that you talk to are like, what is she talking about? So I knew that my life shifted in this way of hafachti taklit. My record turned over when I said that growing up, I knew that God loved me by virtue of the teachers I had in my life. And the shift happened when I started to say that I know that God loves me by virtue of the students that I have in my life. And I know that there's not a moment that I walk alone in the world. And I walk with the grace of my teachers, I walk with the grace of my students, and I walk with the grace of my colleagues. It has been a tremendous gift since being in Los Angeles. Rabbi Artson, I know he has been here, and we share a mutual love for him. His vision for the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies, bringing me from Yerushalayim to be the spiritual mentor of the Rabbinical School, a vision that I could have never imagined. I think that if you can imagine what it's like to grow up as an Orthodox young woman in Israel of the 70s and 80s, living your life as an Orthodox Rav was not really a reality. And that's why the doctorate, when people say to me, like, when did you start? I said, I started in 6th grade. Because that's when I knew I was going to do a doctorate. That's when I knew that if I wanted a platform for my voice in the world, as an Orthodox young woman, the only platform I had was the academic platform. And my grandfather of blessed memory, Rabbi Dr. David Rubenstein, he held a vision in our family of Rabbi Doctor. So I think like my name is now going to be Rabbi Dr. Reb Mimi, because I'm never letting go of the gift that my students gave me of walking in the world as Reb Mimi. And I want to thank you, Rabbi Feinstein, for the partnership of walking together with me, with my colleagues, with the community, and VBS has always been a home for me in the Valley. I've spent Shabbat here, I've spent other evenings here. It's an amazing gift to walk into a shul that you don't pray in regularly and feel at home. You know where the restroom is, you know where the important things are. You know how to get around. It's an amazing gift, and I want to thank you, and I want to thank you for everything that you do for our students. And the way they walk in the world is a gift that you give them as well. And they vibrate on multiple levels. And I'm going to save the guitar to sing when we come back from our break. Nonetheless, there are 6 strings on my guitar and on many guitars. Some have 12. And I always tell my students that you can't go out into the world if you don't know what 6 strings are on your guitar. Like whose vibration, whose Torah you're walking in the world with. Who, as the words, as you play your vocal cords, what are the strings of your vocal cords? And I want to thank you for being one of those strings of the vocal cords of my students and our students. It's a great gift for all of us. It's rare that I get an opportunity to talk about God, although the truth is, that's all I talk about. And the gift of talking about God is, you can never be wrong. You can also never be So I want to share some teachings, and I brought some texts for us because always. And truth be told, yes, I thought to myself, I can't walk in without bringing these partners. These are the people. The Ishbitzer Rebbe, Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, the Me'or Einayim, the Chernobyl Rebbe. These are the people that I walk with, and these are the people that, in so many ways, coin and identify for me a journey and a way of walking and being in a relationship with God. And that is true. I do want to tell you that I'm not embarrassed. Number one is to say that I live in Poland of the 19th century, and I have visitation rights to the 21st century. And when I walk into an electronics store, a phone store, or a Best Buy, and I need to buy something, that's actually the young men or women that are there, that's actually what I say to them. I say, I need you to know that I live in Poland of the 19th century, and I have $300 to spend on this, whatever this is. So you can either help me and translate, or you can take advantage of me, and that's in your hands right now. But I truly live in Poland in the 19th century. And then when they go through their spiel, and then I say, okay, now tell me what questions I don't know to ask. And I want to say it's no different with God. I'd like, tell me what questions I don't know to ask. I want to start with a couple of stories about me and my relationship with God, and then some of these texts that hold me and hold my relationship with God. The truth is, I don't really remember myself not being in relationship with God. Now, I'm going to say God, I'm going to say one and only, I'm going to say divine, I'm going to say mother. I'm going to say almighty, I'm going to say 1,000,001 names, and I'm going to say sometimes he, and I'm going to say sometimes she. I usually don't say they or it, that's true be told, because when I say it, I think of a hairy thing walking around. That's a childhood memory as well. It was the hand, right? In the Addams family, it was the hand. But I will say he, she. And if I say a lot of he's and you think bilingual, then I'll be PC, because he in Hebrew is she in English. So if I say he, and I think bilingual, because truly, despite this American accent, born on the Major Deegan passing Yankee Stadium on the way to the hospital. And my parents made Aliyah when I was 8 years old, but decided to make Aliyah when I was 2. So I grew up knowing that America was temporary. Don't tell any of the candidates to the presidency that America is temporary, but I grew up knowing that America was temporary, and we were on our way to Israel. So we got off the plane, and I was 8 years old and spoke Hebrew with an Israeli accent. God forbid anyone should ever know that I wasn't born there. But nonetheless, there are memories and amazing memories. And I always tell my students, I bless you to be a congregational rabbi like the way Rabbi Israel Miller, a blessed memory was, because here we are 40 years later, and the children, we are still connected. And I left that community 40 years ago, and we are still connected. And what he created for my parents and their friends and us kids are now in our 50s and 60s, but we're still us kids, a total blessing. And I bless my students to have those kind of communities, and having been in a community and saying, well, their children grew up in this shul, and now we see the next generation, God willing, there'll be more mitzvahs of the grandchildren that you'll be celebrating here in this shul as well. So I want to talk about a couple of memories about God, and two of them actually are from my Bronx life, and the third one is my Yerushalayim life and home. My grandparents that I didn't merit to meet in the physical realm, my mother's parents were taller than I am, my mother taller than I am. My father was actually, of blessed memory, the short one in the house. Really, 5'8" was really not much, right? So in our house, it's like 5'10" and a half, 5'11". And that meant I was always a tall child, and I'm 3. I was born in March, and that summer, I'm 3 and a bit, and I'm at camp. And the bicycles were divided by age group. And there are rules and regulations about bicycles and children at camps that go by age. when it came time to ride our bikes on the roof, the bikes for my age group were small because I was tall. And they wouldn't give me a bigger bike because it wasn't my age group. And I remember saying to myself, dear God, they don't understand me. They don't see me. They don't know what I need. They don't know how to take care of me. Or we're going to have to do this alone, the two of us. Because it's not going to come from people. Because they don't see me. They don't understand me. They don't know what I need. They don't know how to take care of me. And you're just going to have to do this. You are going to have to do this. And I think that was my first memory of partnering with God. And partnering for me is really the word that I want to bring here. The title talks about the shadow of love and doubt, and really I think shadow, love, doubt, those for me are components of what my partnership with God looks like. So that's 3.5, and I want to fast forward. The first years I went to Yeshiva Rabbi Moses Soloveitchik in Washington Heights, which is no longer, and took the 38 bus from the Bronx to Washington Heights. And as the bus would cross University Avenue, there was an amazing cathedral in the corner. And the nuns on the bus, as the bus would cross University Avenue, they would make the sign of the cross. And here I am, this little yeshiva girl, who saw these nuns in God's uniform. And I always say that growing up, I wanted to be a nun when I grew up. They were the only women that I knew that lived a life of service. They were the only women I knew that lived a life of service. So I wanted to be a nun when I grew up. I see them every day doing this, and that was for me divine and devotion. And I wanted to know what that felt like. But growing up, I knew there were 2 books that were prohibited to me equally. 2 books. The New Testament and the Talmud. As an Orthodox girl, that's not the home my mother came from, because my grandfather, Orthodox rabbi, my mother learned Talmud with him. But that was the Israel that I grew up in. So 2 books prohibited equally, the New Testament and the Talmud. And don't worry, got to Hebrew University, did my proficiency exams in the New Testament, and the last cycle of the Daf Yomi, when you take 7.5 years to complete 1 page a day of the Talmud, I did that to make sure that my voice and my eyes and my lips were on every page of the Talmud forever. I see these nuns, they're doing what they're doing, and I am pleased. So one day, I decide, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this. As the bus is passing the cathedral, University Avenue, and the nuns, very obvious to the eye, 7 years old, I put my hand on my heart, and with 1 finger, make this tiny little cross. As I am looking to make sure that no one sees. And then I wait. I was waiting for the lightning. I mean, that's clear. I was waiting for the lightning. I was waiting to be struck down, which didn't happen. I got off the bus. I ran 5 blocks from the bus to yeshiva, ran as fast as I could, because if I got away from the bus, I'd be safe. I was on my best behavior the whole day, waiting for the lightning, waiting to be struck, and it didn't happen. And I said to myself, I guess God doesn't care. I guess God doesn't care. And then the only solution for me to figure out what that means that God doesn't care was to take on a deeply reverent and halachic life, because somehow that was how I was going to figure out what it is that God wants. Often, I share this story of the nuns as a bracket to a story when I was 35. So we're fast forwarding. by now, I grew up in Rehovot and then Yerushalayim, master's degree in Hasidic thought from Hebrew University, and was the director of the Women's Beit Midrash at Yakar, which is a Beit Midrash that was founded by Rabbi Mickey Rosen of blessed memory in the early 90s, first in London and then in Yerushalayim. Innovative, creative. Really, in the 1990s, a Beit Midrash for artists. In the 1990s, a Beit Midrash for Jews and Muslims. In the 1990s, a bilingual Beit Midrash for women. And students from all walks of the world. And I realized, since I had been in this partnership with God since I was 3.5, I was 35 and I was single, and I had no idea what it meant to be alone. There was a pasuk in the Torah, there was a verse in the Torah, Vayivater Yaakov levado, and Yaakov was alone, left alone. I said, that is a pasuk, that is a verse in the Torah that I have no idea what that means. I don't know what it means to be alone. Even though in the way of the world, I was perceived as living alone. Someone once asked my smicha charuta, the person, Rabbi Yonah Gordas, that we learned together for our ordination, if I live alone, and he said, no, she lives with 50 Hasidic rabbis who have been dead for 200 years. True. So I realized I don't know what alone is, because God's always there. And I said, Master of the world, can I have some privacy for a moment? Can I be alone for a moment? So I say to Rabbi Rosen, I say, Mickey, I'm going away for 3 days. I can't tell you where I'm going. Pray for me. Okay, I'm the associate director of the institute. I'm the head of the Women's Beit Midrash. And I say, I'm going away for 3 days. I can't tell you where I'm going. Pray for me. So Sunday night, I teach, actually, the Me'or Einayim, the Chernobyl Rebbe. I still wasn't driving. And a friend picks me up, and she drives me out of the city towards Latrun. We get off the road, drive into the forest, and there's a monastery there. And the nuns are waiting for me, the Beatitudes. And they know that I've come for 3 days of retreat. And they don't use electricity, but they had a generator, they waited. I got there, they show me where the restroom is, they show me where the chapel is, and my room, which had a rickety bed, which I thought if I sighed would fall, and a chair that could hold the candle. Classic, really high ceilings. It was straight out of The Name of the Rose. It wasn't even Poland to the 18th century. I was back to, the 14th century somewhere. And the lights go off, and I start sobbing my eyes out. And I'm thinking, what is wrong with you? Everyone wants a relationship with God, and you are running away from God? You have what so many want, and you are walking away? And sob and sob and sob, until subsequently I fall asleep. And as hard as I was crying when I went to fall asleep, that's how hard I was laughing when I wake up in the morning. I wake up in the morning and I see where I am, and I say to myself, I'm not always kind to myself, you idiot. That's one of the nicer names I call myself. Say, you're running away from God and you go to a monastery? What were you thinking? There's someone in the chapel praying 24/7. This is where I run away from God? And I realized at that moment that I would never be able to run away from God, and I would never have a moment of my life where God is not present. And I will tell you, so you can enjoy the moment, I spent those 3 days in the monastery, even though I left Monday night to come back to teach, because that year on Monday nights I was teaching the Mea Shiloch, the Ishbitzer Rebbe. It was the parasha of Naso, which is his headquarters for serving God from a place of doubt. And it was no way in the world that I wasn't going to teach about serving God from a place of doubt. So I came back into the city, taught about doubt. Then I went to dinner with my mother, because my mother, God bless her, she has a very strong heart. Imagine being my mother for all these years. She's got a strong heart. And I knew that she was concerned that I would not come back from the monastery ever. So I went out to dinner with her so she would know it was okay. And then I went back to the monastery and completed my retreat. And I knew that I would never be alone again. And I needed to learn to celebrate and to honor what it means to be in this relationship with God. So what does it mean for me to be in a relationship with God? And one last thing about God, and I want to say is, a few months ago, I was with a friend. We went to have dinner at Real Food Daily. The Maitre D' looked at the two of us and said, "Table for two." And I smiled and said, "Well, it depends how many of my personalities you want to seat." And he looked at me and goes, "Table for five?" Really, you gotta love a person like that. That is to say, when I say the word God, or I say Kudsha B'richu, or I say Shechina, or I say divine, or I say almighty, or I say creator, or I say energy, each one of us has more than one name, more than one thought, more than one attribute, more than one relationship. And whatever word we say and we use in another moment, we could have been saying a different name. I'm on a first name basis, therefore George, or Georgina. And I know that when the divine hears George or Georgina, Georgia could be either me, or I have a soul sister who's a nun and she likes George too. She borrows it. So it could be either me or Sister Claire, and that's fine. She wouldn't take on Georgina at any point. So Georgina, when God hears Georgina, says, "Oh, Mimi, what does she want?" Therefore, if any of these words that I say are uncomfortable for you, just take it out of the sentence, put in a word that you're comfortable with. Any of the titles, any of the names, take it out, put a word that you're comfortable with. My partnership with God, I want to say, looks like this page on the Talmud. That's on the back of your handouts. Welcome to the Bavli, to the Talmud Bavli, Tractate Chulin, page 60b. 60b is a very special page in the Talmud. What it does there throughout the page, and you have a piece of it, is it talks about different contradictions that appear in the story of creation. And one of the contradictions is that it actually says, first it says, and you can follow in the Hebrew and in the English, first it says, "And God made the two great lights, Vayas Elohim et shnei hamerot hagdolim." And then it says, "Et hamerot gadol v'et hamerot katan." Then we have, immediately afterwards, a great light and a small light. And Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, what he's doing is, he's creating a juxtaposition between these two psukim. He pits them against each other and says, 1 second, what was God doing? And what did God mean? And why do we have one verse that says two great lights, and then we have another verse that says one big light and one small light? How does that happen? We, by the way, yes, we're familiar. We have a sun and we have a moon. So we actually understand the reality of a ma'or gadol and a ma'or katan, a great light and a small light. We have a reality in nature that sustains that vision. But nonetheless, when God first set out to create, isn't that a wonderful sentence that I just said something that all of us understand that in a completely different way? When God set out to create the world, two great lights. So what happens here next is Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, he tells this wonderful story, and it's a story that's commonly and often quoted about Mrs. Moon that comes to God and says, first there's a vision of two great lights, and then Mrs. Moon comes to God and says, you can't have two great lights that serve with one crown. Sheyishamshu, that serve. Now, I hope you also can hear, for the Hebrew speakers in this room, Sheyishamshu, that will serve. You can also hear the word Shemesh, thank you, right? You can't have two sons with an O, with a U, with a U. You can have two sons with an O. You can't have two sons with a U. You can't have two sons. Not functionally, Yishamshu, they can't function. So Mrs. Moon says to God, if you want to be functional in the world, it's not going to work. So God says, you know what? let's go for functionality. I actually wanted to create a world with my vision, my ultimate vision of greatness, but you're talking about functionality, I'll go with you. You be the small one. And she says, are you crazy? I'm trying to help you out here and you're punishing me? So God tries to appease her and has all these ideas of how that can happen. And then he says, listen, you know, the Jewish year is according to the moon. Yes, but days and night are not according to the moon, right? The sun is there too, right? And he says, but you'll shine because, you know, sometimes the moon is in the sky when the sun is in the sky. So the sun is only in the sky during the day, but you can be in the sky during the day and at night. And she says, yeah, but that's like lighting a candle in the middle at noon. Like who can see the impact of a candle at noon? And he says, yeah, but the children of Israel, they will be likened to you, not to the sun. And she's not buying any of this. Then the Talmud says, and that's what's underlined, on seeing that it would not be consoled. He can't appease her. God says, bring an atonement for me for making the moon smaller. We came out of Rosh Chodesh today. We had 2 days of Rosh Chodesh that as the sun set, actually, Rosh Chodesh concluded. On Rosh Chodesh, we bring a sin offering. In the time of the temple, we would bring a sin offering. And the explanation for that has to do with this, saying, God hurt her feelings and could not appease her, and therefore, on Rosh Chodesh said, my children, bring a sin offering so she will know that I never forgot that I hurt her feelings. The way I want to read the Talmud is a little bit different. What I think God is saying is, don't do this on my behalf. Do this for me. Meaning to say the following. Bring an offering not because I hurt her feelings, but bring an offering because I surrendered my vision. Because when Mrs. Moon came to God and said, what is this 2 great lights? That you can't function in the world that way. There was really only one answer for God to answer at that moment. Young lady, deal with it. Deal. I have a vision of a world of 2 great lights. And people will have to learn how to function, mirroring each other's greatness. And dominion and hierarchy, it's not going to work. It's not my vision of the world. I have a vision of 2 great lights. And your responsibility, because you're sensitive to it, you have to find a way to make it work. The God I know, the God that I believe in, the God that I want to say, the God that I believe in, the God that I know, the God that I pray in the presence of, the God that I love, the God that I hate, the God that I fight with, the God that I don't know exists, the God that I never doubt exists. They're not always one of the same. I'm not a major fan of consistency here. I'm not. I can love one day and I can not know the next day. And I can have clarity one day and I can be in doubt the next day. The next breath. The next breath. The next breath. Consistency is that I'm in relationship, but not what the relationship is. Not the nature of the relationship, but the relationship. So I want to say that for me, this God, this Elokut, this divine mother, Ima Ila'ah, this Shekhinah, it's a God that my work in the world is to make sure that God shines as a great light. And it's a relationship with a divine that also wants to make sure that I shine as a great light. And each and every one of us shines as a great light. A relationship with God cannot make us small. A relationship with God cannot make us small, and it cannot make any other person small. And we can't make ourselves big by making God small either. And there are those that want to do that as well in the way they walk in the world and the way they claim dominion. שני מאורות גדולים. God shared with us what God's vision for the world is. 2 great lights. And how are we going to be in a relationship with the divine in which God is great and we are great? I always felt uncomfortable, to be honest, and I hope I'm not stepping here on too many toes. People use this phrase, my better half, when talking about their partner. So this is the tricky thing for me with that phrase. You know, half plus a half is 1, and that's true. Now you're getting the extent of my abilities here in the sciences. So it's going to be over in 3 seconds. Half and a half is 1, that is true. But relationships are multiplications. They're not plus minus. And a half times a half, I actually know this, that a half times a half is a quarter. But 1 times 1 is 1. Relationship is 1 times 1, not a half times a half. It's 1 times 1. That's how we create 1. שני מאורות גדולים, the 2 great lights, that's how we become one with God. That we are one, and God is one. And it's not a one that closes off relationship, it's a one that invites relationship. There is, Peter Pan is so serious. If you remember how Peter Pan begins, Peter Pan needs Wendy to sew on his shadow. Because Peter Pan knows that you cannot exist in the world without a shadow. Being in this world means shadow. There's only one moment in the day that there isn't a shadow, and that is when we are completely aligned with the sun. When the angle of the sun is exactly upon us, that's the one moment there is no shadow. That, for me, is what it means to be in a relationship with God. And sometimes, I gotta tell you, the shadow is bigger than me. And the shadow changes. And that's also true. And sometimes it gets smaller and smaller, and there's a split second every once in a while. A split second, no shadow. My relationship with God is not one of comfort, it's one of deep love. And in that way, there's a Rorschach test going on here. And when you mentioned Rabbi Professor David Hartman of blessed memory, there are so many reasons why it was so prophetic to bring him into this conversation. Because the one source that did not make it onto the page, but is on my notes, is the Rambam. And may she live long in good health. His daughter, Dr. Tova Hartman, is one of my readers. So 4 a.m. this morning, she was the address to that email with the PDF that went out. So thank you for bringing her here as well. The Rambam, right, he describes what God's love is. And he asks, "V'ketzad ha'ava re'uya?" What is appropriate and fitting love? And you don't have that on the page. That's what I said. Like there's a Freudian moment here. Why the Rambam didn't make it on the page. But I'm going to quote the Rambam for you. My mind is for you. He says, what is the appropriate love of God? שאוהב את השם אהבה גדולה, יתרה, עזה מאוד. This is a love which is great, which is mighty. There's an abundance of it. עד שתהא נפשו קשורה באהבת השם, to the moment where our heart is bound to God, ונמצא שוגה בה תמיד כאילו חולי אהבה, עד שאין דעתו פנויה מאהבת אותה אישה. It's like being lovesick to a woman. That is the image that Rambam offers. an obsession with God, and an infatuation with God. And that is true, that I sit in that position. And I don't have a reality in the world that is outside of a relationship with God. And I don't have a reality of a moment in which I don't need to be answering to God. The challenge with that is twofold. One is fire can also be a dangerous element. We can cook with it. It can be a warming agent, but it can also be a consuming agent. And that's why I wanted to bring you the Talmud, which is so fascinating in my eyes. And that does appear on the first page. So what you have in the left top there, yes, in the bold black letters, is a section from the Talmud, which you have in English on the bottom of the page. So I want to hold this moment for you. It's Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year. And the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, who in our tradition was the embodiment of that perfection of the human condition. So you have the holiest person on the holiest day entering into the Holy of Holies in the holiest place. The holiest day, the holiest place, the holiest person. And the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, is going to bring the Ktoret, the English incense. Thank you. Every once in a while, definitely after 6 p.m. That's why I stopped teaching at 6. The Holy of Holies, the holiest man, the holiest person, archetype, metaphor, the holiest person, the holiest time, the holiest place, the ultimate service, the incense. And the Talmud has a very practical question. Well, you would think practical questions in that moment. He walks into the Holy of Holies holding a pan with coals and a handful of incense. And the service at that moment, which is the pinnacle service of the day, is to sprinkle the incense on the coals, cloud, and God manifests above the cherubs. And at that moment, God reveals God's self. The cherubs that were standing like this, they mesh with one another. There's a moment of divine intimacy, and that is likened to the intimacy between our souls and God's soul. That is how we know that our actions have been atoned for. That moment of sprinkling the incense on the coals is that pinnacle moment. And the Talmud has a really very practical question. When the high priest does this, do you put your hand out and then sprinkle the incense on the coals towards you? Or do you take that handful of incense and start sprinkling it from you until your hand reaches right in front of the ark? Really? This is it? Right? Forgive me for a moment, but it's like saying, in that kiss, which lip is above which lip? Which lip is below which lip? That would be a comparison here for a moment. That's the question of the Talmud. But the Talmud has a good reason for that. Why? The Talmud says, if you put your hand out like this and start sprinkling the coal, do you know what's going to happen? You're going to burn yourself. You're going to burn yourself because the cloud is going to start coming up and it's going to burn your hand. Therefore, start from here and bring it close so you're protected. Yeah, it's going to be warm, but it's only going to be the coals. But if you start from here, you say, I'm going to start from me and I'm going to get to God. Then as you're sprinkling, the smoke is going to burn your hand. For me, that paradigm of what does it mean? The pinnacle moment, the pinnacle place, the pinnacle person, the pinnacle service, and you could get burned. Is there nowhere safe with God? Is there no moment safe with God? Is being in a relationship with God mean that, yes, at any given moment, I could be scorched? And for me, the Talmud is saying that is possible. It's possible. If you sprinkle the incense from you towards God, it's possible. It's wonderful to have this relationship, and it's possible to be burned. So, how do we do this, God and I? How do I do this? We do it the following way. Number one is we honor and respect this concept of the two great lights. And the other is we share the not knowing and we share the doubt, which is why you have this other source from the Mea Shiloach, the Ishbitzer Rebbe. I, by the way, have a student who has already told me that in her mind, because the question is like, I should live long to 120, but who am I going to bequeath this to? So she once said, no, what do you mean bequeath it? You're going to be buried with it. There used to be a tradition of burying people with pieces of their objects of their life that were part of who their identity was. It was very touching to me that I actually had a student who saw this as this book as an extension of my life and said that I was going to be buried with that. I'd have to ask him, I'd have to ask his wife, I'm not so sure. The teaching you have in front of you from the Ishbitzer Rebbe is one of the most important in this book. And it's on the verse, Im bechukotai telechu, if you walk in my ways. And the question that's often posed is, why does this verse begin with, if you walk in my ways? Because normally, I don't know what normally in terms of God means, but normally, more often, verses in the Torah start with, Vaydaber Hashem leMoshe lemor, daber b'nei Yisrael, God speaks to Moshe, Moses, tell the children of Israel, go, just listen to me, just do what I tell you. But that's not what happens here, if you walk in my ways. And for the Ishbitzer Rebbe, the if here works in two realms. One is us, meaning to say, and that's what he says here on line number 9, and therefore it says if, is the language of doubt. That even if a person is careful to observe all of the Shulchan Aruch, they are still doubtful if they are aligned themselves with the depth of God's will. This isn't to say that halacha isn't important. I will never say that. But for the Ishbitzer Rebbe, halacha is the beginning of the conversation. The ketubah, under the chuppah, that talks about rights and obligations, is the beginning of the relationship. And God forbid a couple should take care of each other because they actually signed a document under the chuppah that talks about their obligations to each other. And for the Ishbitzer Rebbe saying, what does God want? What does God want of me? What does God want of me, specifically me? We all share the halacha. That's what God wants of us. But for the Ishbitzer Rebbe, the haunting question is, what does God want of me specifically? That's my doubt. But God bless the Ishbitzer Rebbe because he says things that other people have a hard time saying. And he says the following on line 12, V'gam leshon im u leshon tefillah. If is also the language of prayer. Because God, so to speak, prays. God prays. And if I paused here and we've had 5 hours, I'd pause here and I'd ask you all to close your eyes for a moment. I don't care how uncomfortable that would be. And ask yourself, what is God praying? If there is a God, and if God prays, what do you think God is praying? For the Mea Shiloach, for the Ishbitzer Rebbe, God prays. God, so to speak, prays. He has the heart, right? There's this humility. I can't say that God prays, but God, so to speak, prays. And what is God's prayer? If only you walk in the way of my statutes and will be aligned with the depth of my will. Please hear me. This God is a vulnerable God. This God is a God that wants to be seen. This is a God that wants to manifest in the world and be in relationship. When God creates the human being God says, "Lo tov heyot adam levado." First creates Adam and says it's not good for Adam to be alone. Therefore, I will create Chava. Did you ever stop to ask yourself why God says it's not good for Adam to be alone? Why didn't God say it's not good for Adam to be busy? It's not good for Adam to be hungry. I'll create a cook. It's not good for Adam to wear the same clothes every day. I'll create a launderer. Alone. That is the qualification. And I say to myself, what does that mean? That means that God knows about aloneness. And God, it was not good for God to be alone. And being in God's, created in God's image, is that is our challenge, aloneness. It's not good for God to be alone. It's not good for Adam to be alone. It's not good for us to be alone. And God prays every day, if only I'm seen. Imagine we're coming up to Purim. Purim is, the world is God's costume. The world is God's costume. And do we see the divine hiding in the costume? I'm going to stop here. There's a lot more. There's a piece of poetry maybe at the end, a piece of poetry that I wrote 25 years ago about my relationship with God that I thought would be important to share, and it's not in translation. So maybe later after we take a break. Shadow, love, doubt. This is what God and I share. Partnership.
Reb Mimi, I'm going to begin with a very simple-minded question. You ready? Are you ready? You got to talk right into the mic so they can hear you. These are sweet people. Okay? I want to begin with a very simple-minded question. Okay?
Now you scare me.
No. This is something you've dealt with a lot. A person comes and says to you, La'otazoid, says like this, you know, Rabbi, I've never had a relationship with God. It's not that I'm anti-religious or unreligious or an atheist. It's just that God has never been part of my life. It's just never been part of my feeling. It's never been part of my life. It's never been something I've been attached to or involved with. And I listen to you with a certain degree of envy, the way that you've had this love relationship with God your whole life, and I have never had it. And so I want to ask you, where do I start? What's the first step on the path to becoming a person who engages with God in the world if I've never had any relationship, any sense of God, any sense of the divine in my life at all? Where do you start? You have to speak right into the mic, so pull it up a little bit.
So you start with the mic.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. Yeah. No, sorry.
Okay.
There you go.
I would ask them when they fell in love with someone. And I'd ask them what it felt like to fall in love, and what part of falling in love can they not explain.
Okay.
And that would be a way.
So the person would, let's go to the next step. The person then describes to you, you know, a love of a partner, a spouse, a love of a child, a dear friend who's come to be with me at a moment of need. And the part I can't explain is the sense of the ecstasy of the joy with my partner, the utter sweetness of the joy of my child or a grandchild,
Right.
or the deep comfort that comes with a friend in the world. But that's not God, they would say to you. That's a very human experience.
Clearly, the question that I think is first on the table is when they say God, what do they mean?
Well, that's the person who says, I don't know. You actually have a sense. And I don't know, but I envy, people who seem to
What
have
do they-
something that I don't have in my life.
I want to know what they envy.
Okay.
I want to know what they envy.
So let's say they would say they envy this tremendous sense that I'm surrounded by someone, by love, I'm surrounded by creation, I'm surrounded by something beneficent. I'm surrounded by, there's more than me in the world. The world isn't just me and Donald Trump. The
Training
world, there's
wheels.
something else in the world that makes that's worth aspiring, reaching, holding on to.
To enter into a relationship with God, there needs to be a willingness to surrender. There needs to be a willingness to live in the gaps between the frames of the pictures that create a movie, and there needs to be a willingness to live with the unknown and the uncertain. Those would be my questions. I remember actually having a conversation with one of my students, and who I think came to me exactly with what you're describing, and I said to them, I said, God is messy. Are you willing to live with messy? And I paused for a moment and I said, look at yourself. There's not a hair on your head that is not in place. Are you willing to live with messy? That's one question that I ask. Are you willing to surrender? Are you willing to let go? Are you willing to not be in control? Are you willing to live with the not knowing? Are you willing to live with the messy? And another way to enter into this space is playing. And what does that mean? What does it mean to try on a role? What does it mean to allow yourself to experience and to experiment and see what that feels like? I was reminded of a story that leaped into my heart, so I'm going to tell it. Mm-hmm. And that has to do with playing. Children, when they play, when they're in it, it's for real. If you take them out of the game, they know that they were playing a game a moment ago, but as they're in the game, it's for real. And about 6-7 months after Reb Shlomo crossed over, he crossed over in Cheshvan, 1994, and that summer, it's the 9 days between Rosh Chodesh Av and Tisha B'Av, it's the 9 days of mourning. And for years, he was always in Israel during those 9 days, and he would teach and we would learn. And it's the first time, when you go through a year of mourning, every first is hard, and every first brings you back to the first day. The first Chag, the first Shabbat, every time you go back you're back at the cemetery, you're back at the grave. So it's the first 9 days, and I'm in my home in Yerushalayim, and I'm sobbing my eyes out. I miss him. And I want to be learning with him, and he's not here. So I say to myself, when he was alive, he used to call his answering service. So why don't you call him? And then I say to myself, because I'm a rational and a reasonable person sometimes, I say, but he's on the other side. What is the point of, what, are you crazy to call him? And then I say to myself, but children, when they play make-believe, they know it's make-believe, but when they're in the game, it's for real for a moment. So call him. And in his lifetime, he had multiple phone numbers. It was the shul number, and it was like, one of the numbers was an answering service. That was the best. Because calling America from Israel 25 years ago was expensive. But if you called the answering service, you got a recording. I heard his voice. There was always, the outgoing message was always a blessing. I heard his voice. I received a blessing. I said what I needed to say. Didn't have to deal with him, and it was in my budget. It was always a win-win situation. And I always knew. I often, sometimes he'd call back. Sometimes someone would tell me, oh, Shlomo said that you called. You're in Yerushalayim. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. It's Thursday night. You've just finished cooking for Shabbat. Your house smells like Shabbat. You're like so excited. Like the guests are coming, and everything is so from another world. And who are you going to say? I'm bursting at the seams because Shabbat is coming and everything is ready. 3 a.m. Oh, but you can call New York because it's not 3 a.m. in New York. So here I am, and he's crossed over already 8 months, and I'm saying to myself, well, when children play make-believe, it's real in that moment. Call. Which I do. I pick up the phone in Yerushalayim 8 months after he's gone, and I dial 212-724-5193, and the phone begins to ring. Now, I need you to hear this with your heart, not with your mind. Because with my mind, I can tell you that after the phone rang, what happened was an automated synthesizer played. But I want to tell you what my heart heard. There's a click. I hear a female voice, and she says, I'm sorry. That was already good. Someone on the other side says she's sorry. I'm mourning and I'm sobbing and she's sorry. I am sorry. The number you have reached is temporarily disconnected. And I start laughing. There's someone who writes the text for AT&T who thinks that they have the most mundane and insignificant position in the world. But they understand Jewish mysticism 101 like no one else. I'm sorry. The number you have reached. Okay, how many people talk about death as being temporarily disconnected? The number you have reached is temporarily disconnected. And if that wasn't enough, then she says, no further information is currently available. And as hard as I was crying, that's how hard I was laughing. I heard everything I needed to hear. Now in my mind, I knew it was a synthesizer and a recording. And in my heart, I heard someone say to me, I'm sorry. The number you've reached is temporarily disconnected. And that's the way in.
So let's take one more step. So that same person who comes to you says to you, I go to synagogue occasionally.
God's not there.
Right. Well,
Often.
that's my question. And
Often, not always,
I
often.
sit in the prayer services and I read the book and I don't get it. Because first of all, the God who is described by the book, it would be hard for me to embrace. And number two, I don't understand what is supposed to happen to me when I'm reading this book in the synagogue. Now, I like being with other Jews. I like the Kiddush, the rabbi's entertaining, but I don't understand this prayer thing that you do. And I know that when you pray, it seems to be a whole different realm of experience. So tell me what I can do. Tell me what I'm supposed to do. Tell me what I'm supposed to feel. Give me a doorway into something more meaningful than what I'm experiencing, because what I'm experiencing is kind of empty. Not that any Jew would ever say that about our shul, but
When I get up there,
yeah.
there are a lot of those up there that I need to have a face-to-face conversation with. One of them is the Rambam. One of them is the Rambam. One of them is Maimonides.
Maimonides, right.
When describing the need to coin prayer, because we didn't know how to speak in the presence of the divine, and therefore we now have a coined prayer, which now means that we actually don't know how to speak to the divine. We don't know how to be in the presence of the divine. We actually think, unfortunately, that prayer means reading words from a page.
Well, that's what the rabbi tells us to do. He says, turn to page 37 and read with me.
And I would suggest at that moment, close the book. I would suggest in that moment, if you feel uncomfortable because you're being disrespectful to the rabbi, I'd say pick one word. Sit with one word. What you're saying is that when you're making love, you're actually reading the manual how to make love as you're making love.
I tried that.
I don't think so.
It pissed off my wife, something awful. So put down the damn book, she said.
Thank you. Put down the damn book.
Right.
Put down the damn book.
And do what?
And be in the presence of. Be in the presence of. You want to express your love with one rose. And you expect with one rose, the person who receives the rose hears. I love you in such a way that if I could, I would buy you every rose in the world. And I can't buy you every rose in the world. So I'm going to bring you one rose. And with that one rose, I pray that you understand everything that I want to say with this one rose. That's what prayer is. It's bringing God a rose. Sometimes a bouquet. One word and another word and another word and another word. And sometimes one rose. I will confess, I was in shul a while ago, and I was talking to a dear friend I sit next to, who's a Holocaust survivor, and I love her beyond words. And she protects me, and she holds me, and I can cry with her. And I'm talking to her, and someone who was a guest in the shul turns around and shushes me. My first thought was like, do you know who I am that you're shushing me? Like, how dare you shush me? That was my first thought, I'm being honest. And then my second thought is, lady, I don't come here to pray. I come here to talk. If I want to pray, I stay home. Or sometimes I pray and then I go to shul.
Right.
That's also true. And I'm being facetious. And the truth really is that there is amazing power in prayer when a community prays together. When a community understands that what they're doing is sharing a passion and sharing a relationship and sharing a moment of intimacy. And there are ways to be intimate in public.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is that we are teaching a vision of prayer that is bound to words in a book. And it can't be.
So when you said a moment ago, take one word, what does that feel like? What is that like? What word does one take? What word do you take? What word would you recommend to us to take? If I go into a restaurant and I I want a bottle of wine, and I don't know, I ask a guy sommelier, it's a fancy word for a guy with the wine,
Nice.
recommend a wine to me. So you're my prayer sommelier. Recommend a word for me for tomorrow morning.
The question I would ask you is, I won't recommend a word for you. I tell my students I will never tell them what to do. I'll only walk with them.
Okay.
I tell them a teacher is someone who is one step ahead of you on their journey,
Okay.
on their path. So you get to see what walking looks like, but I will never tell them what to do. But I'll ask the following question. I want you to, for a moment, to entertain the reality that there is a God. For the next 20 seconds, we're all going to be in the entertainment industry. I want you to entertain the thought that there is a God. I want you to entertain the thought that God actually hears. And I want you to entertain the thought that God actually cares. If you could hear one word that God would utter, what would you want that word to be? And if you could utter one word that you know that God hears, what would that word be? And the word you want God to hear you say, that's one word. And the word you want to hear God utter, that is another word. I won't answer that for anyone. Because what they want to hear and then what they want to say, those are their words. But those are the words I would ask them to sit with.
Very nice. I want to take a look at one of the ideas that you raised, because it continues in this, if you don't mind, this dialogue with this
Not knowing.
this doubter here. So on the second half of the side of the page, you gave us a little bit of your teacher, the Meshiloach, right? And you said that his interpretation of these words, Im bechukotai telechu, if you will follow my law, and the last two lines, it says so beautifully, right? He says, and also if is the language of prayer that God, blessed be he, so to speak, prays, if only you will walk in the way of my statutes, you'll be aligned with the depth of my will. And this question of doubt that you said, this sort of question of doubt, that even if you did all of the Shulchan Aruch, there's still a doubt, right? Even if you do all of the Shulchan Aruch, there's still a doubt. Now, first of all, for those of us who are, just in the world, that strikes us a little odd, because when we see somebody who identifies as Hasidic, they look to be a hell of a lot more religious than we are. I mean, they have the costume on, they got the black, they got the beard, even the ladies got the beard. I mean, the whole schmear. And we wonder, you say, well, this guy must be like close with God, because look how many mitzvahs he does. I mean, he's praying all the time, he's keeping a kosher far beyond he wouldn't eat anywhere in the kitchen, in anybody's kitchen, he's so kosher, right? His clothes are kosher, his thoughts are kosher. And then you have this idea here from this rabbi, who's like also a Hasidic rabbi. He says, you can observe the entire Shulchan Aruch, and there's still an if? So what does that mean? If you can do all of the things that this religion asks of you, and there's still an if?
Always an if.
What's the if?
The if is willing to live beyond the capacity of our knowing. I had a moment, if you can imagine a wedding in Israel with 400 people, or maybe there are 300 people, to be honest, in the room, that was actually silent for a moment. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine that? This is how you do it. I'm doing the Bedekin of my Smicha Chavruta.
Smicha Chavruta means her study partner who helped her finish her rabbi studies, right?
So the two of us, Rabbi Yoni Gordis and I, we studied together for our ordination.
This is Yoni, Danny's brother?
No, Danny is Yoni's brother.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, I know Yoni. He was at camp with us one summer, so I know him. Okay.
So Yoni and I, we studied together, learning partners for our ordination. And when he married his life partner, Robbie, I did the Bedekin. So that part of the ceremony before the chuppah, when the chatan comes and traditionally will veil his bride-to-be and his bride. And standing there when we're singing and we're learning and I'm sharing words of Torah. And at one moment I said, I bless you both to always have secrets from each other. That was when everyone stopped. Yep. And I felt like the wicked witch in like Sleeping Beauty, that at the end, right?
Right.
That she said, I'd never been at a wedding in Israel that all of a sudden, dead silence.
Yeah, me neither. Any silence in a wedding in Israel.
Okay. And that was the moment. I bless you both to have secrets from each other, and the room went silent. And then I said, because the minute you think that you know everything about each other, you'll stop talking to each other. And as long as there's something about the other that you don't know, you will always be in dialogue. Who wants to be in a relationship with God in which you know everything?
Speak into the mic, yeah.
Who wants to be in a relationship with God in which you know everything? What kind of relationship is that? Yourself? Do we know ourselves well enough to know every moment in a relationship what we're going to do, what we're going to feel, how we're going to behave, who we're going to be? What are they really saying? What do they really want? How many times we say yes and we mean yes, but sometimes we say yes and we don't mean yes? How many times we say to our kids, do it your way, but really we want them to do it our way? And sometimes we're proud of them that they don't do it our way and they do it their way, because really, even when we say do it our way, we really want them to do it their way. That's also true. how many times we walk into a situation with a preconceived understanding of what that moment is supposed to be, and then it surpasses anything we could have ever imagined. I had a student once who asked me, amazing, I think he'd be happy if I shared his name. It was Rabbi Adam Greenwald. And it was at the end of his second year of rabbinical school, and he was going off to Israel for his third year, and our students spend their third year in Israel. And he said to me, he said, Reb Mimi, if I decide to stay in Israel for an extra year, will you still be here when I come back? My heart broke. I cannot tell you how many pieces. One piece clearly broke because oh my God, he wants me to be here when he comes back? That's love. And then I thought, oh my God, I'm raising a generation of rabbis with abandonment issues because they're not sure that I'm going to be here if they go off to Israel for 2 years instead of 1. And I had to deal with that as well. Mm-hmm. Then I said to him, but I didn't say any of that to him. That was my inner voice going on. My outer voice said the following. I said, dear one, I want to tell you a few things. Number one is, I will be your Rebbe or your Rav no matter where I am and no matter where you are. And our relationship is not bound to a time and a space and a physical location. So that's number one. Number two, you should know that in my life history, normally this is what happens. I work somewhere for 8 years. During year 8, there is a major blow up. I stay 1 more year, and then I leave. That has been the pattern. Year 8, major blow up. I stay an extra year to not leave messy, and year 9, I leave. And then I smile and I go, this is year 8. Which means that this year is the year for the blow up, and next year I leave, which means if you decide to stay in Israel for a second year, I will not be here when you come back. And then I paused and I said, but why would you want to limit my future based on my past? Why would you want to limit my future based on my past? And here we are, 15 years later, I'm still here. Mm. That's how can we limit God's revelation to one moment in history and not an ongoing revelation? And then, can I understand what is being said now, and how is that different to what was said yesterday or the day before or the day before? Mm-hmm. I don't know a relationship with God that doesn't contain an element of doubt. The strength of and the gift of the Mashiach is that God is also in doubt. Mm-hmm. Right? I have a God who doesn't know, so to speak, how I'm going to enter into that relationship with God.
Mm-hmm. But desires the relationship.
But desires the relationship.
From the other side.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And as long as we are in the not knowing and want to know the other, then we will continue to grow together. Uh-huh. And the God that I was in relationship with, when I said, okay, God, and my bicycle, I need a bigger bike, that's not the same God that I'm in relationship with now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually it is. Because you're still looking for a bigger bike in your life, right? A bigger vehicle, a bigger way of going, right?
I'm looking for one that grows with me.
Right, exactly.
Right, that's the image. The image of being in the desert is that our garments grew with us. On the one hand, you're right. The questions don't change.
Right.
But the responses change.
Right.
That is true.
But now I want to climb up. I want to climb another level higher. The pshat, the simple meaning of that verse, im bechukotai telechu, is God telling Moshe, tell the people Israel, I got these laws and I need you to follow them or I'm going to be miffed at you, right? That's the simple meaning of the text. But the Meshiloach... But that's the point. The Meshiloach doesn't read it as God talking to Moses. The Meshiloach reads this as a commentary on the inner life of the religious person in all generations.
Correct. Because the Torah is a blueprint for each and every one of us. It's not a history book. It doesn't tell us what happened in the time of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It doesn't tell us what happened in the time of Yoshua and Rachav and Yericho, right? How are we going to break those walls that alienate us from the world? That is, how are those walls of Jericho going to fall? The Torah is a blueprint for each and every one of us. The part of us that is willing to stand and sit at the opening of the tent and to embrace the outside world, that's the Avraham part of us. And the part of us which is very private, that's the Sarah part of us. When the angels ask Abraham, where is Sarah, your wife? He says, Ba'ohel, she is in the tent. And there's a part of us which is very private, and that's the Sarah part of us. And there's a wrestling part of us, and that's the Jacob part of us. And there's a wilderness part of us, and that's the Esau part of us. And there's a doubt part of us, and that can also be the Amalek part of us. That book is not a story that was. It's a story of each and every one of us that happens every moment. And that is true. That verse, if you walk in my ways, is God saying to each and every one of us, every day, every moment, if you only walk in your ways.
So the purpose of the Meshiloach is to translate it from the mythic story of a long time ago in the Middle East to the inner life of a person sitting right here.
I would take it even a step further.
Go ahead.
I would say that historic, mythic story in the Middle East is irrelevant. It was never about that. It's only about...
This is heresy, you know. I mean, you get you thrown in...
What can I tell you? I've been excommunicated from
my
home, my land, my family, my community.
So it never...
At least I can enjoy
never
it.
was a historical book, a story book. It always was a blueprint for the inner life.
For the mystic, for sure. Now, that doesn't mean to say that it didn't happen.
Right.
It doesn't mean to say that it didn't happen. It also happened. But we're not, the story isn't told for us to know what happened. The story is told for us to know how to be and how to live and how to be in relationship. And how to interact with the divine and interact with each other and interact with ourselves. That's why. The Ma'or Einayim, he says this. He says, if you can imagine divine light having to manifest, if you can imagine silence having to be translated into words, if you can imagine the feeling of I love you that we now need to put into words and actions, if you can imagine the moment that a cloud becomes, a gas becomes a teardrop. If you can imagine the moment it becomes a snowflake. And every snowflake is different and unique in that moment. And the Ma'or Einayim, the Chernobyl Rebbe, in that book, that it's like, I feel like it's like Goldilocks there. There's a small book, and there's a medium book, and then there's a big book. So in the medium book, נתלבשה סיפורי המעשיות כפי הזמן. God's divine light was garmented in stories at that time, which means that this is the gift of the tradition that we have. And yes, if the Torah talked about images with other names and told us other stories, that is the life of Torah that we would be living. And it would be a sanctification of our life to be living that life based on the words that we were given. That's true.
So let me take you to a different place for just a moment, if it's okay.
I'm yours.
No, I know. It was just fun. You were a wonderful student of Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. And most of us know Shlomo from his records. Some of us got to see him in concert. Anyone see him in concert? Remember Reb Shlomo? Here, yeah? Yeah. He came here. Reb Shlomo was such an interesting character. I knew him when I I heard him several times when I was a teenager. I had very long hair and strange ideas, And my parents said, well, if you're going to have strange ideas, here's a rabbi who can speak to you.
Oh, I thought they said cut your hair.
No, that didn't, no. But we knew him from the performative part of him. You know, the songs, we sing his songs. We knew him in concerts. Many of us owned his records. But very few of us got to learn with him the way you did. So for just a moment, if it's okay, what was his inner life like? Who was he inside? What was he like to learn with as a rabbi?
I can tell you my experience of what that is, and then I have a sense that other students would experience that differently.
No, but I want to hear your experience.
My understanding of those moments were the learning, on the one hand, were the moments where he was alive, where his mind and his intellect could be wed to God's mind and intellect as it manifested through the words of the Talmud and the rabbinic voice. And where God revealed God's wisdom, and where he, on the one hand, could meet that meet and be in that match, and then as a teacher, what that translation looks like. Therefore, I suppose the image I want to use is a whole protein, meaning to say there were the black letters and the white spaces. And he had the ability to engage both in the black letters and to master the black letters, and also to be able to interpret the white spaces in between those letters that then availed for a word to manifest. Mm-hmm. And for me, what he gave me was he gave me a way to translate the black letters and to learn how to read the white spaces. Because coming back to the teaching of the Mea Shiloach, the way you stay in that relationship is that you actually hold on to the black letters and simultaneously read the white spaces. Because, for example, the Rebbe Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, that's the smaller of the books, he asked the question, why is a Sefer Torah, why is a Torah scroll? If it's missing a letter, we know that we can't fulfill our obligation of reading from the Torah from it. But then he asked, why is it if two letters are touching, are connected, it's also not fit for fulfilling our obligation? The words are there, all the words are there, why would that be a problem? And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak says the reason is that when two letters are touching, the Torah, the black letters, is whole and complete, but the Torah of the white spaces is lacking. And we have an obligation that as we live a life of the black letters, to maintain the wholeness and the integrity of the Torah of the white spaces. Mm-hmm. And for him, learning was a way of bringing together the black letters and the white spaces. And connected, I think, to your question about prayer, the same challenge that we have in the realm of prayer, of learning to embrace the white spaces between the black letters of the prayer book, the same as in the realm of learning. Mm-hmm. And how do we learn to learn in a way that as we're reading the black letters, we're also interpreting the white spaces? Mm-hmm. I think one of the most amazing moments for me with him was his last summer. And as I described the 9 days, and for years, the last years before I crossed over, there would be a whole week of learning at Yakar. And we would do Beit Midrash preparation, and he would teach a halachic component in the morning and then a Hasidic component in the afternoon. It could be about prayer, it could be about peace, it could be about charity. The last summer, I asked him to teach the laws of mourning. And that last summer, he taught the whole week of the 9 days, and then Tisha B'Av, and the day of, we saw a full day of mourning, and then always he had this tradition that after Tisha B'Av was over, that is when traditionally we bless the new moon. So that the tradition is to bless the new moon, the Motzei Shabbat, the first Motzei Shabbat of the month, and that can go until the middle of the month. during the 9 days, there's a tradition to wait actually not to bless the new moon during the 9 days itself and to wait until the Tisha B'Av is over and that night. That's what happened, and he did a whole learning that evening. We come back to Yakal, because we did it in the park near Yakal. We come back to Yakal, it's close to midnight, and we're standing outside, and he said to me, Mimi, go get me a Baba Kama, I haven't learned all week. Go get me a tractate of the Talmud, Baba Kama, I haven't learned all week. And I remember standing there looking at him, thinking to myself, you were teaching a whole week. What do you mean to say, go get me a tractate of the Talmud, go get me a Baba Kama, I haven't learned all week? Unless he was really telling me that there's a quality of learning for himself. That was a learning that he did in the yeshiva. And that no matter what, that was missing in his life. And he could spend a whole week teaching, but when he was private with himself alone, that's where he wanted to go back to. Go get me a Baba Kama. I haven't learned all week.
Well, there's this wonderful tradition, you know, that Rabbi Akiva had a form of prayer that he did when he was in public, which was pretty much normal like everybody else. But it was said that when he davened in private, he prayed in private, it was a whole different thing. He was ecstatic, he danced. One of his students said he started in one end of the room, and you'd come half an hour later, he was clear on the other end of the room. And the idea that he had an inner life which was different than his public life.
And I tell my students, that's why you spend endless hours. You spend endless hours for the moments. Had I gone home earlier, I would have never had that moment. I would have never had that insight. I would have never heard him say, go get me a Baba Kama. I haven't learned all week.
Right. Well, I want to thank you for sharing this evening with us. Thank you all very much. And we'll, it was very special.
Thank you.
Next week, we're going to conclude this whole series. So come back and we'll tell you everything we learned. Everything. Oh, the guitar. You want to play a little Stairway to Heaven, maybe? Kidding. That was a joke.
I don't even know it.
Come on, whatever you got. They want
I
to hear
brought it, as I said, because
play us a little, play us.
these are my partners in the journey, right? And this is the way that my words and your thoughts, this whole evening, they can come together.
Fakasha. Oops.
So we can sing one Nigun together, right?
Yeah.
I want to say one thing I learned about singing.
This is the difference between a rabbi and a cantor. A cantor would just sing the song. A rabbi starts the song and then stops and says, I want to tell you one thing about a song. Okay? We're singing. Go ahead.
And it's something that I learned from a cantor.
But you got to say it.
So a cantor, Linda Hirschhorn, she taught me the following. We were together at a women's conference in May of 1990-something, Project Kesher in Kiev. It was supposed to be the first Jewish women's international choir. And she taught us that when you sing, you need to sing loud enough that you can hear yourself, and quiet enough to hear the people on both of your sides singing as well. Loud enough that you hear yourself, so not too quiet that everyone else shuts you out, and quiet enough that you don't shut anyone else out and you can hear the person to your right and to your left singing. And that is a way to pray. Loud enough, I hear myself. Not too loud, I don't hear the people to my right and to my left. It's a way to learn. Loud enough that I hear myself. Not too loud that I don't hear my study partner. It's also a way to walk in the world. Loud enough that I don't get lost. And not too loud that I don't always hear God. Hi, 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 If you haven't sung until now, this is the time. Hi, 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 hi,